Can I be reminded we're going to go into a fully open session to begin with, are we not? Yes. This afternoon's proceedings are going to be live streamed to begin with, at least, and those who have recording devices may use those devices to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. They must not be used for recording. There are reporting restriction orders which may apply later on in the afternoon. Those must be complied with strictly. Yes.
Thank you, sir. HM1, picking up where I left off, which was the commencement of your intimate and sexual relationship with Miss Fuller. Could we have a look, please, at paragraph 467 of your witness statement? It is page 200 and I think it will be 11, 10 and 11.
Forgive me for interrupting. Could someone please get my transcription device running properly? Don't let me hold you up, but that can be done in due course. I'd be grateful.
So paragraph 467 of HM1's witness statement, please. It should be 210 to 11, I think. Okay, do you still not have it on your screens? I'm being told. Yeah. Sorry, HM1, just to explain, we're keeping you waiting because the transcription in the room may not be working.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I think with assistance, that's been resolved. Could we have on the screen, please, the bottom of page 209 there, or 210 on the system, and 211. Thank you. And HM1, I had read to you the first part, the first two-thirds of paragraph 467. I'd like to pick up where I left off, please. So can we look on the second of those two pages on the screen? Thank you. All right, I'm going to pick up. I was attracted to Liz. We'd become close friends already, and this felt like a natural extension of a friendship we already had. It felt real, and my feelings towards her were real and felt natural. This all occurred in minutes in her flat. In what sense do you suggest that this was a natural extension of a friendship when, in fact, you were not who you told Miss Fuller you were?
Well, I wasn't operating on the basis that everything I said was linked to who I really was. It was all part of who I was required to be, who I purported to be, and who everyone else was required to accept me as.
But in the context of forming an intimate and sexual relationship with a woman, you weren't required to do that in your role as Matt Rayner, were you?
No requirement at all.
And so what operated on your mind to consider that this was some sort of natural extension of a friendship when it was clearly a deceitful friendship, designed to be deceitful from the outset, given your role?
Well, it was already deceitful, technically, by the time we'd got to this stage.
Yes. And so how is it that you come to describe it as a natural extension of the friendship when it was all a deceit?
Well, because allowing for that, the fact it was already a deception, it felt genuinely as if there was something more intense between us.
So genuine feelings on your part, HN1, for Miss Fuller.
Yes.
Is that really the case, or did you have in the back of your mind, if not at the forefront of your mind, that you were forming an especially close relationship with a target, effectively, of your operation, your intelligence operation?
No, that wasn't the case.
Throughout the period that you engaged in this relationship with Miss Fuller, you continued, didn't you, to go twice weekly, or at least thereabouts, to meetings at the SDS safe houses?
Yes.
There you would have spoken with other undercover officers and your managers, correct?
Yes.
You had received advice from the outset on your evidence about the importance of keeping your cover life and your real life separate, hadn't you?
Yes.
You understood that your cover life and your real life were different and to be kept separate, didn't you?
Yes.
You had a wife at home who you were going home to, is that correct?
Yes, but not that often.
But nonetheless, you went home, and in your home, your real life, you continued to act as the husband of Mrs. HN1.
Yes.
You understood, didn't you, that the relationship that you were forming with Miss Fuller was not natural at all, but based wholly upon your deceit of her as to who you really were?
Well, I think I was, as with most of those friendships, I was well beyond the part of any attempted concealment that what I was doing was a deception. Deception began from day one of everybody.
Do you accept that there's a material difference between forming a deceitful friendship for the purposes of obtaining intelligence as part of your job and forming a deceitful sexual relationship with a woman which forms no part of your job?
I do. There's a total difference, yes.
And so the deceit was different, wasn't it? It wasn't deceit sanctioned in order for you to be an intelligence gathering undercover officer, but deceit born of your decision to enter into a relationship with Miss Fuller.
Yeah, the conscious a thought process that had any form of this was an act of deception in the way that it's being portrayed here in the question it wasn't part of my thought process. So whether it should have been or whether it shouldn't have been, it just wasn't. It was something that within that, what I considered to be a grey area, I just considered it to be a natural, whether it was natural or not, there was a level of intensity there, but I felt was mutual that resulted in what happened. All I can say is that is what happened as a result of those feelings.
So you didn't give a thought to the additional and separate deceit upon Miss Fuller involved in entering into an intimate relationship with her, rather than the necessary friendship that might exist in order for you to do your job?
Well, I think I alluded to this a couple of days ago. So from my own personal perspective, I would have considered, I accept there is we can argue a difference here, but for me the deception was so advanced at that stage anyway, in terms of the very close friendship we had. There wasn't a clinical distinction of this being within the context of how it happened, significantly different, or indeed different from the level of deception that had already got me to this position.
Is that really the truth, HM1, that you didn't see a material difference between deceiving a woman into a sexual relationship, which had nothing to do, on your account, with getting the job done, and deceiving any number of people in order to ensure that you could obtain the best intelligence you could?
So all I can give you is how I felt at the time, and how this sort of clinical distinction of deception from an intense friendship, and that deception had an even more sort of, if you like, greater significance as a result of how those feelings developed. It just wasn't part of my thinking. The deception was so advanced already.
More than 30 years have passed. Have you reflected, looking back, on whether there was a material difference between the deception that was inherent in your role and your deception of Denise Fuller in forming this sexual and intimate relationship with her?
Well, I think it's a two-part answer, if I may. So, first part, do I have any different recollection in the cold light of day 30 years later as to those thought processes and sort of intensity of emotions that played out at that time? No, I recall them being exactly as described. Do I admit that it was the wrong thing to have done? Then yes, affairs are often wrong. This was wrong, shouldn't have happened, should have exercised more control, should have controlled my emotions more. But all I can tell you is what happened and how and what led to it.
The question was whether you had reflected on the nature of the deception of Miss Fuller being different from the nature of the deception that you describe as an inherent part of your role as an undercover officer. Have you reflected on whether there's a difference between those two deceptions?
So from my perspective, again, I was trying to explain this a couple of days earlier. From my perspective, I can imagine feeling equally aggrieved by the betrayal of a close friend, regardless of necessarily whether it was a sexual relationship or otherwise. So in your question, have I reflected on the degree to which that was materially different? Well, I know because I've heard that from the effect and the impact, yes, it clearly was, but my articulation wasn't that this was in any way intended, or that indeed anyone should actually find out. That wasn't an excuse for what I did or expected to get away with it, but had any of this been in my mind that eventually Miss Fuller will find out, it just wouldn't have done it.
HM1, that sounds rather like I did it because I knew I could get away with it. Is that what you intended to convey?
No, and I tried to actually subsume that into that previous comment. I know that's how that sounds. I'm just trying to convey the fact that in terms of any idea that this could result in hurt and betrayal, my whole approach to this operation was that no one should find out, regardless of any suspicions and disappointment over lack of subsequent contact. The whole environment of this operation was predicated on arrival, a deployment, and a successful extraction, with no one being any the wiser. And that was absolutely part of my ability to do this job, with a view to no one actually being unduly hurt by the subsequent revelations that this was who I was.
But as I understand your evidence, entering into a sexual relationship with Miss Fuller as opposed to a friendship formed no part of your operation. It sat alongside it and was done, you say, for genuine emotional reasons. Is that right?
Yes, I mean that is what happened.
So there was no operational necessity to perpetrate that deceit on Miss Fuller, was there?
There was no operational necessity at all, no.
You understood, didn't you, that Miss Fuller was not in a position to make a fully informed choice about whether Matt Rayner was somebody she really wanted to enter into that sort of relationship with, didn't you?
I didn't think about it in that way any more than I thought about other intense friendships being through the act of deceit, and therefore people doing it without sufficient knowledge as to whether they were forming friendships with me.
Even though on this occasion your deceit was procuring her consent to sexual intercourse?
I don't think I was procuring her consent, if you don't mind. It felt mutual to me.
But there was a power imbalance, wasn't there, HM1? You knew that you were a police officer, and she didn't.
That did not play out in my thinking whatsoever. And in fact, in terms of the power imbalance, I felt pretty inferior to her sense of standing, self-assuredness, invincibility, strength. Surprised she had any interest in me whatsoever.
The invincibility and strength of a woman who just weeks earlier had been in such a state in terms of her mental health that she had attempted to take her own life. Is that your evidence?
Well, that event certainly took place. There was every indication that she'd come through that with the help of friends, and did not appear to be in any way in a state of depression or suicidal tendencies.
Is your experience of life now, HM1, looking back over many decades, that those with depression serious enough that it leads them to contemplate or take action to end their life get over it in a matter of weeks?
I've had no involvement with that word that would allow me to comment either way on that.
Can we have a look, please, at paragraph 481B of your witness statement, page 217, I think it will be on. 217, thank you. You were asked when you gave your witness statement whether you reported any aspect of the relationship with Miss Fuller to your managers. And you said this: I informed Bob Lambert of the initial overture from Liz. And Bob's response was that this was or may have been a test, and there was only one way to pass it. I was asking you questions before lunch based on Miss Fuller's account, which you seemed to accept, which was that on the very first night that the two of you kissed, you also went on to stay over and have sex. At what point did you speak to Bob Lambert in the sequence of events? Before or after that night?
Would have been after, I think.
So by the time you spoke to him, you had already entered, albeit in the early stages, you had begun a sexual, intimate relationship with Miss Fuller?
Yes, although the close association between the two of us was known about.
But this is different, isn't it? This is you speaking to Bob Lambert about the possibility of a relationship with Miss Fuller, a sexual and intimate relationship, not just a friendship.
Yes, absolutely.
And do you maintain that you spoke to Bob Lambert about an initial overture from Miss Fuller, even though you now accept that that first night involved sexual intercourse?
I don't recall how it played out, the chronology of it. What I can say for certain is that within a very short space of time, everyone knew about it, as it were, but everyone had known about the close association between the two of us, from which probably other things have already been inferred.
That wasn't my question, but now that you've mentioned it, who is everyone in the phrase everyone knew about it?
So there was reporting from other sources around the country on the close association between myself and Liz, if that's how I'm allowed to refer to us. And
right, so sorry, can I just perhaps cut this short? Everyone, by everyone, you meant within the SDS, did you?
Yes. That sort of, if you like, that sort of openly available story, as it were, travels fast.
Can I focus for now? I'll come back to that question, but focus for now on what's described in your statement here, which is an early conversation with Bob Lambert. about what's described as the initial overture from Liz. How soon after that first night you spent with Miss Fuller did you speak to Bob Lambert?
I think it would have been within days, or within days, as I remember. I don't have clear recollection.
And why did you speak to him at all about it? What was your purpose in doing so?
I think just to seek a view, maybe. Needed to tell someone. There would be, if there weren't already, knowledge of this coming to the office by other means.
Within a few days of you spending a single night with Miss Fuller?
Well, I don't know about the few days. I can't comment on the timings of it. I do know that generally, if I may, there's there would have the office, if you like, environment and culture for receipt of this type of story and this type of activity was of not authorization, but indifference, and that sort of generic these things happen was, if you like, to paraphrase, a way of dealing with it.
I'm going to come on to ask you about the attitudes of your managers generally to this topic. What I want to focus on now, please, is the conversation that you had with Bob Lambert in this very early stage of your relationship with Miss Fuller. You said, in answer to my questions just a moment ago, about why you spoke to Bob Lambert, or what your purpose was, that you were seeking a view. About what precisely were you seeking Bob Lambert's view?
Well, was it a view, or was it a conversation about something that had happened which you need to know about? I'd frame it in that way.
Why would he need to know about it? What was your thinking, HM1?
What was my thinking? My thinking was that the only real transparency I can adopt with anyone at all, which is my approach to the whole of that work, was being transparent with the office.
Did you appreciate that what you had done in having sex with Miss Fuller might be regarded as, I'll use a broad phrase, a bad thing by your managers when you approached Bob Lambert?
I didn't approach that conversation expecting that view to be prevalent.
Did you anticipate that Bob Lambert might tell you that you should cease immediately any relationship of that nature?
I wasn't anticipating that, no.
And what had led you to understand not to anticipate that sort of response?
I think because of his broader understanding of the challenges of this type of work and the possibility that these sorts of things, or the potential for these sorts of things, are there.
And how did you come to the opinion that Bob Lambert had a broader understanding of the challenges of this type of work, or the potential for these sorts of things to happen?
Well, he'd been an operator in the field himself.
Did you know, HM1, that not only had he been an officer in the field, but he had himself entered 4 times into sexual relationships of one kind or another with different women?
I didn't know that at the time.
Why was it Bob Lambert who you chose to speak to in this first instance?
Because he was the one with whom I'd had the longest relationship. He was the one that was involved in my part of the selection process and was familiar with the field in which I was operating and had responsibility for it.
Are you quite sure that it wasn't because he was known as an officer who had himself entered into relationships with women undercover?
No, it most certainly wasn't, and I didn't expect anyway that this would be anything other than the subject of a wider conversation with his colleagues in the office.
Given that your evidence is that you didn't anticipate that this would be viewed as you having done anything wrong, did you therefore openly share the fact that you had entered a sexual relationship with Miss Fuller, with other managers and with other undercover officers in the unit?
Not with other undercover officers, no.
Why not, if it was nothing to be remarked upon?
But I wasn't saying it was nothing to be remarked upon. It was something really very tricky indeed. I found it very tricky. I was deeply conflicted by it. And this was absolutely nobody's business other than a conversation with the people responsible for my well-being and welfare.
Your witness statement suggests that Robert Lambert's response was that this was or may have been a test. What did you understand him to mean by the use of the term test?
So there's one theory that to test someone's bona fides, that certain challenges would be put into place to oust spies, informants, undercover officers. It either could be, for example, incitement to do something, or it could be sexual temptation. I didn't think it was, by the way.
Didn't think it was what?
A test.
So did you not explain to Bob Lambert, no, I'm confident it's not a test. This is a natural extension of our friendship, to use words from earlier in your statement?
Yeah, I think it played out in a bit more of a discursive way than that. But I did commit to a firm belief that I didn't believe it was a test. And I mean, it might well have been. I don't know. I didn't believe it was. I don't believe it was now.
And you told Robert Lambert as much. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And what was his reaction?
I think he just accepted that this was tricky. And we were this scenario was one in which he could say I was conflicted, but this is where we were.
So it's done now. No advice about what to do in the future?
Well, it was a discussion about, I don't actually recall much of the discussion, other than I was operating in that grey area in which something was neither sanctioned nor specifically condoned or prescribed.
Did Robert Lambert make it clear to you on that occasion that what you were doing was not sanctioned?
Well, he didn't use that language. I mean, I knew that wasn't the case. There was no, if you like, formal "you are authorised to continue." There's no such directive, but there was no. The contrary wasn't the case either. There was no instruction to do anything other than manage.
So no suggestion that you should cease the relationship?
Correct.
When you spoke to Robert Lambert, were you aware of whether he had seen your earlier report on Miss Fuller describing her depression and her suicide attempt?
Well, I would have assumed with certainty that he had done.
And did the two of you discuss anything about whether, or rather the decision that you had made to enter into a relationship with Miss Fuller at that time in her life?
No.
Given what you have said about how the conversation with Robert Lambert went, when your witness statement says that he said there was only one way to pass the test, what did that mean?
Yeah. Don't know whether I've tried to simplify that. I don't remember him actually putting it quite like that, or because I'd already sort of rejected the suggestion it was a test. Now, whether that was his way of dealing with it, I don't know. But it was a conversation that sort of petered out, really. With this is a tricky situation, how are we going to manage it? But it was more discursive than just more recognition than a prescribed course of action.
Where were you when you were having this conversation with Robert Lambert? Do you remember?
Well, I would have thought it was would have been at one of the safe houses, but I can't picture here and now us sitting in any particular room and having that.
Right. Can you say whether it was just the two of you having the conversation?
I think no, I can't. It would have. It was likely to have been, but it could easily have been with the DCI.
HN86.
Yes. Yes.
So it could have been HN86 present along with Robert Lambert when you had this first conversation?
It could have been. I just don't remember in that very first one there being anyone else.
I think you do say it's in the paragraph of your witness statement that's on the screen that the relationship was alluded to on a handful of occasions, and you recall HN86 saying something along the lines of these things happen. So
yes.
At some point, your evidence is that HN86 came to know about the relationship. Is that right?
Well, I think at some stage everyone in the office would have done.
And by everyone in the office, do you mean DCI, DI, and all the DSs that were there at the time?
Yes.
What precisely led you to the conclusion that HN86 knew of your relationship with Miss Fuller?
The degree to which it was being reported on by others.
And the degree to which it was being reported on by others came to be known to you how?
By being shown reports in which the relationship was described.
By whom were they shown to you, or by what method?
I think the usual means of the weekly meetings. The intelligence reports were brought out, or they were alluded to verbally.
Alluded to verbally by who? By HN86?
Yeah, HN86 or Robert Lambert.
And did you ever have any explicit conversation with HN86 about your relationship with Miss Fuller?
No, not beyond this is happening, it's tricky, but this is the nature of it.
Why would you have a conversation, it's happening, it's tricky, but this is the nature of it, if it were not about the relationship with Miss Fuller?
Well, I'm summarising a sort of discussion that took place over the period of time of the relationship with the office.
What I'm trying to establish, HM1, is what it is specifically, if anything, that causes you to conclude that HN86 knew about the relationship beyond what you've referred to, which is the existence of other information describing it taking place.
Well, I mean, sort of implicit and explicit references to it during free-flowing conversations between me and him over the time that we worked together.
So there were explicit references between you and HN86 to your relationship with Miss Fuller? Or
yeah,
not?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, they weren't so much explicit as just references to it. I'm aware these are tricky, these situations.
That's him speaking to you and saying that?
I'm summarising, the sort of type of sentiment that
Yes.
He would deal with this with.
And in saying that, was it clear to you that he knew that you were having a relationship with an identified individual, namely Miss Fuller, or something else?
No, it was beyond any doubt that he knew exactly what was going on. I mean, I didn't seek to conceal it or camouflage it or obfuscate it.
Your witness statement suggests that he said something along the lines of, "These things happen." Are you confident that that's the sort of thing that HN86 said to you?
Yeah, yes, yes, literally and in sort of style.
Do you mean his style of speaking or his style of addressing these things? Or
I think on this particular one, it was a understand what you're going through sort of thing. These things happen, they're tricky. We are where we are. Those weren't his exact words, but that's the sentiment.
And is that what you understood his attitude generally to be to this topic as a result of your conversations with him?
I took that to mean that he understood that this was a grey area. I was in the thick of it, as it were. There was lots to deal with here, but sort of these things happen was his attitude.
The inquiry has obtained a witness statement from HN86 in his capacity as the Detective Chief Inspector of the unit, and I'm going to ask that an extract be put up on the screen, please. UCPI 037368. And can we start at page 3 of the extract, please? Oh, so you do have this, you have it at section B4.3. Can we start at page 3, paragraph 342, please? This is what HN86 has told the inquiry in his written statement, HM1. I disagree with HM1's inquiry witness statement, paragraph 481, where he suggests that I was aware and said, "These things happen." My reaction would not have been as sanguine as that. I did not know and would have been compelled to find out more detail if he had even hinted at an intimate relationship in his cover identity. "These things happen" was not the attitude in the SDS generally. Is HN86 correct?
I don't believe so, no.
Do you say that "these things happen," bearing in mind that it's a shorthand for something, "these things happen" was the attitude of the SDS generally at the time that you served?
Well, I don't know if it was the attitude in SDS generally. This was, all I can answer this is with regards to what we are talking about here. So in terms of my predicament, there was an acknowledgement of the difficulty of what I was going through, what this situation presented itself with a sort of "these things happen" type aura approach.
All right. Could we take that down, please, and look at page 5 of the extract of HN86's statement? Page 5, paragraph 355 of that same reference. Sorry, I might need the page just slightly before. Thank you. HN86 has also said this, HM1, that you were recruited while he was a manager, and that when you started to prepare for his deployment, quote, "I emphasised the practical reasons why serious friendships should be avoided and the moral/ethical and operational imperative of avoiding intimate relationships." So in other words, he's saying that he advised you that you should avoid intimate relationships and indeed avoid serious friendships. Did he advise you to avoid intimate relationships?
No.
Was it ever described as an operational imperative to avoid intimate relationships to you?
So I'm just reading it again. No, that's I don't recognise any of that at all.
Was it ever suggested to you, discussed with you, that there might be moral and/or ethical reasons why you should avoid intimate relationships in your undercover role?
No, I think I got there on my own on that one, but no such explicit references to intimate relationships in that way.
Any implicit references about intimate relationships and moral or ethical considerations connected to them?
Well, I think to begin with, none of this was about as far from anything that I could possibly have envisaged. Least of all, had it as a remote possibility of a scenario I would end up in. So this was these were alien, if you like, alien things. Well, I mean, almost of course, the moral and the ethics and the sort of the challenges that they present to all of this type of work is a challenge from day one. And part of the selection process was on those that were capable of making judgment calls that by and large got that articulation right. But all I would add to that is through every single operation of every successful field officer that did something worthwhile and had success, it was absolutely predicated on a trusted relationship of some sort that was, whether sexual or otherwise, in most occasions not sexual, it was certainly intimate.
But not sexual?
Absolutely, no, absolutely, yes. In the vast majority of cases, not, to my knowledge.
When I first asked you about whether you were given, whether you had any discussion about moral and ethical aspects of entering into an intimate relationship, you said something along the lines of, I got there on my own. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I took the view that there was a job to be done. It was required to be done by people that thought about these things seriously and not recklessly. There was a requirement and people were carefully selected, and I considered myself to be someone with a strong moral compass that would make that adjudication properly. That said, I conceded that I'd taken the position of working for the state to deceive people, and that was the sort of, if you like, the anchor and the decision I'd made to align myself with that, if you like, that part of the struggle. I admired these people, most of them immensely, but I'd taken a different route in being part of the organisation that was charged with thwarting the extreme aspects of their activity. It didn't stop me admiring or having genuine feelings or being in utter admiration of that level of devotion. And therein lies the moral, ethical, I guess, dilemma on a daily basis of how you balance admiration and respect for the position you've taken in life to work for the organisation that was there to protect others.
What about the moral and ethical considerations, specifically with regard to entering into an intimate relationship or sexual relationship? What did you reflect in terms of that?
I was deeply conflicted.
Can you explain what conflict you felt?
Yes, the conflict of what felt like genuine, and for me they were, genuine emotions, and the recognition that this was a situation that probably was best avoided, but I hadn't avoided it.
Best avoided by you, I take it you mean?
Well, yes. Yes. I mean, look, I'm not cheapening the comparison, but I do come back to, from what I hear from other people, you made the reference to, 40 years, 30 years later, most affairs are deeply regretted, but they're normally the product of a bad decision that doesn't undermine the intensity and genuineness of the emotion felt at the time.
But an affair is usually a term that is applied to a married person having a sexual relationship with somebody outside of that marriage, isn't it?
It is, but I wasn't making that comparison. I was making the comparison of the nature of it being deemed to have been a mistake, but driven by emotions that took someone to a position they probably shouldn't have gone to.
But you were, as you've said, you were working on behalf of the state. That put you in a different category from most people who might go looking for or find themselves involved in a sexual relationship outside of their marriage. You were in a different position, weren't you?
Yeah, totally. It was a privileged position. It was one I felt a deep sense of responsibility for. So yes.
And do you consider that you abused that privilege by entering into a sexual relationship with Miss Fuller?
Not that I abused it, because that, for me, suggests something intentional. But I do agree it was the wrong thing to have done.
An unintentional abuse of the privilege that was bestowed upon you when you took up your role as an undercover officer on behalf of the state?
It was a mistake.
Would you accept that?
I find the word abuse tricky. I do concede mistake.
Is it because...
I'd admit mistake even.
Do you, looking back, do you consider that your behaviour in entering into the sexual relationship with Miss Fuller is worthy of criticism? Would you say that it would be fair to criticise you for your decision to enter into and continue that relationship?
I can see how people think it was the wrong thing to have done.
If we look at a different paragraph from this extract of HN 86's statement, paragraph 334, page 1 of the extract. He says that in the course of making this statement, I have learned that some UCOs did have sexual relationships with activists and other members of the public in their cover identities while I was a manager in the SDS. If I had been asked at the time, my view would have been the same as it is now. These were serious betrayals of the trust reposed in them and constituted misconduct. Do you consider that what you did constituted misconduct, HM1?
No, I consider it was the wrong thing to have done. I do accept that.
And why then, in your view, was it wrong but not misconduct?
I think this is the work that I've been asked to do that was played right to the heart of this nature of work. And the grey area that surrounded it, I think prevents me going the full hog and saying it was misconduct. I absolutely admit it was the wrong thing to have done, and I think, when I read... Sorry, go on.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I just reading that paragraph that you put up, forgive me, was that by HN?
86.
Yeah. I do have trouble with that.
What does that mean? Do you think HN 86, in what he's saying there, does not represent his true position?
Well, it's a pity he couldn't have turned up to be perhaps questioned about it. I don't.
His management will be the subject of consideration in the next tranche of this inquiry,
Okay,
HM1.
all right.
So at the moment, we have only a written statement from him.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
What would you say if he were here in terms of questions for him on the back of this paragraph?
I'd have just been appealing to a little bit more of his acknowledgement of his full oversight and knowledge of everything that went on the squad under his reign, because it was a very open, transparent unit where a whole range of challenging aspects to everyone's operation was something he made a point of getting to know about.
And that included relationships entered into not just by you, sexual relationships, but by other officers who served alongside you. Is that right?
Well, all I can say specifically about me, I know for certain that he did know.
Was it generally known that there were other officers serving alongside you who were conducting sexual relationships? So to take an example, HN78, Trevor Morris, the inquiry's heard from 2 women, one B with whom he conducted a relationship that lasted some time, and a second Jenny with who he had a close friendship which resulted in a night when they had sex together. Was that generally known about on the unit?
No, and it certainly wasn't known to me when I was in the field.
I'll come back to some of the later officers later on in my questioning of UHM1. For now, can we go back, please, just to the conversation with Lambert that you had early on? Just 1 or 2 more questions about that, please. Did Robert Lambert express to you any concern about the impact on Denise Fuller of the relationship that you were entering into with her?
No.
Did you consider the impact that the relationship might have on Denise Fuller, given that you weren't who you told her you were?
No, and I appreciate how when I answer in this way, it sounds a bit as if I was doing it with a view to trying to get away with it. But my mindset was that Liz would never find out. There was nothing to know while we were engaged in this type of activity in this level of intimacy.
When I asked you earlier about Robert Lambert's suggestion that this might be a test, and I asked you what you understood by that, you gave one part of your answer was that it might be a test to see if you really were who you said you were. I'm paraphrasing. And the second was that it might be, as I understood it, a suggestion that it was a woman who was sort of looking to engage you in a sexual relationship, so motivated by the woman. Was there any sense on the SDS that as an undercover officer you might face women who you'd have to somehow avoid?
Yes.
Thank you. HM1, I want to ask you, please, about a particular episode or incident during your relationship with Miss Fuller that she has given evidence about. She has described an episode or an occurrence that she says you were involved in when her cat died, and it caused her to spend a few days in her room with the dead cat. Do you recall an incident along those lines?
Yes.
And her account of it is that she didn't answer when you came to the door, so you climbed the wall and got in through her bedroom window to check she was okay. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
And you then buried her cat for her?
Yes. Well, certainly helped her.
Why did you do that? Why did you climb the wall when she didn't come to the door?
Either because someone had told me, or she'd made clear that something wasn't quite right, and she was in some sort of distress.
And this wasn't right at the beginning of your relationship. This was once you were already together, wasn't it?
I think so.
And so, although when I asked you questions earlier, you said that far from the attempt to take her own life causing you to consider that she was vulnerable, she seemed resilient. In fact, this was another example of when she was distressed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you have some genuine concern for her well-being that caused you to climb the wall to gain access to her?
So clearly something was not quite right. Yeah. I can't remember whether one of her friends had told me that her cat had died, and I knew how much the cat had meant to her, or whether I found out during the attempts to work out why she wasn't answering.
But nonetheless, you perceived that she may well have been in a significant amount of distress during this period.
Yeah, I think I got to know quite early on. I can't remember who told me that it was she was very upset over the death of her cat.
Do you want to reconsider at all your earlier answers that you didn't perceive Miss Fuller to be an individual with significant vulnerabilities?
No, I don't wish to revisit that. Thank you. I mean, this was a specific bereavement linked to something very specific, which I got the impression she, myself, and friends helped to get through together.
But not everybody whose cat dies ends up spending 3 days upset in the room with the cat, do they? That's an indicator that she was perhaps more upset than the average person might be by an event like that.
Well, I knew she was deeply upset about it. In her case, her cat meant a great deal to her.
You maintain that you didn't perceive her as somebody who was particularly vulnerable?
Not out of the ordinary, no, but that's different from accepting that the death of her cat had caused a great deal of sadness.
Right. Can I revisit with you briefly an aspect of your account of telling Robert Lambert at the very early stage of your relationship with Miss Fuller that it had begun? The conversation, do you remember we looked at your witness statement when you suggested he told you perhaps it was some sort of test?
Yes.
So that would have been at the very beginning of the relationship. Is that fair?
I think so, yes.
The reports that we looked at earlier in terms of dates indicated that Miss Fuller moved address around the middle of May of 1993, and you accepted that her recollection that the relationship started within a small number of weeks after that was likely to be accurate. Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm not contesting that at all. Yeah.
We know from the documentation that the inquiry has gathered that Robert Lambert did not become the detective inspector in the SDS until October of 1993. Could it be either that you are mistaken when you recall your first conversation about the relationship being with Robert Lambert from amongst the managers, Or could it be that you didn't have a conversation with any of the managers until sometime in October or later in 1993?
Yeah, so it's totally feasible. I'm mistaken on the dates. I think I do remember maintaining a relationship with Robert Lambert as my sort of mentor and colleague at various stages of his association and non-association with the office. So I can't account for that. I might have been mistaken in my timings and as to when and to whom I told, but I certainly remember a conversation with Robert.
Can I just explore what the options might be? So he was not in post as Detective Inspector in around May, June of 1993. So the options are either that you spoke to him but he wasn't yet the Detective Inspector of the unit, or that you spoke to his predecessor, Detective Inspector HN67, at around the time the relationship began, or that the dates of the relationship beginning are not as Miss Fuller recalls them. Are you able to assist us as to whether one of those three is more likely the correct scenario?
Well, I do remember speaking certainly to Bob Lambert in connection with this, regardless of where he was. That's my recollection.
And when you spoke to him, are you confident that it was at the very outset of the relationship with Miss Fuller?
Well, it was reasonably soon after. I can't put a time on it.
Okay, not as much as perhaps 4 to 5 months after?
No, certainly not. No.
Do you recall speaking with HN67, the Detective Inspector in post, at the time the relationship began?
No, I don't recall doing that.
Are you able to assist us as to whether HN67 was aware, to the best of your understanding, of your relationship with Miss Fuller?
Well, I must assume he was, because of the reporting on my relationship from other sources that was circulating.
Can I ask that we put up on the screen MPS 0739 357, that's your B116A, sir. And HM1, the context to this is a report not understood by the inquiry to be a report emanating from the SDS, but rather special branch, more generally, dated the 1st of June of 1993. And so you understand the inquiry has looked at Miss Fuller's file held by special branch to see whether it's able to locate other special branch intelligence reports commenting on you and Miss Fuller of the type that you described that would have given your managers an understanding that you were in a relationship together. And this is the sole example that the inquiry has found there, which appears to bear any relation to this topic. So you see it's a report dealing with a Bromley Animal Defence Group march and rally on the 15th of May of 1993. And the connection between you and Miss Fuller comes only in paragraph 3, where it's described that 2 vehicles were seen entering and their occupants, including Liz Fuller, attended the rally. And one of the vehicles, at little Roman numeral 1, is your cover vehicle with your cover name there. Do you see?
Yes.
Are you talking about this sort of intelligence when you refer to intelligence from which your managers would have understood there was a relationship? Or are you suggesting there was something more explicit? I don't want you to give specifics as to what sort of information, but was it more explicit than this? Or is this the sort of thing you're referring to?
No, I'm referring to something explicit.
On how many occasions, again, please don't be specific as to the nature of it, but on how many occasions did you become aware of explicit references to your relationship with Miss Fuller coming up in intelligence such that your managers would have been become aware of it?
I don't know, but I mean, once it's known once, it's known permanently, as it were, and other undercover officers operating during that time would have had knowledge of the close association.
Which, again, be careful with names, please. Check the cipher list before you use anybody's name if you're not confident, for example, unless it's Andrew Coles or John Dines. But which other undercover officers operating during the time you had a relationship would have known?
I can't remember his specific timing, but
So please just
Andrew Coles, yes, that's the one I know I can mention, was aware of the close association.
And how confident are you that he was aware that you were you were not just having a friendship with Miss Fuller, but you were having a relationship of a more intimate nature?
Well, because everyone on the London scene and further afield knew about it.
And Andrew Coles in particular, anything specific to him, or simply because he was part of that scene?
Well, not specific to him, no, but as someone that was part of the unit, being aware.
We know that HN26 cover name Christine Green followed you into the field, and that there was some overlap between the two of you, although she didn't deploy until towards the end of 1994. Would she have become aware from being on the scene that you and Denise Fuller were in a relationship, or had been in a relationship, if she found out later?
I don't know.
Were there any other undercover officers around at the time, other than Andrew Coles, who, as far as you were concerned, were aware of your relationship with Denise Fuller?
Not what I was aware of, no.
In your witness statement, you said, it's paragraph 481, that you thought the detective sergeants in the back office would have known about it because they would have been seeing the same intelligence reporting that you've referred to as mentioning yours and Denise Fuller's relationship. Who were those detective sergeants? I'll read out who was in post. Detective Sergeant Webb was in post from the summer of 1993 until the end of your deployment, and Detective Sergeant McIntosh also. Do you mean to refer to those two individuals?
Yes, they were there during that time and would have been aware.
And you base that assertion on them having access to the intelligence that you've referred to, is that right? Or anything more?
No, I think not just that, but the fact that other officers knew about this. I say once it's known, it quickly becomes known. And the office quite rightly prided itself on being aware of what everyone was up to and involved with, and the challenges. So there was no attempt to hide it from the office or make the office aware that this was going on. So everyone would have been aware as part of the collective, if you like, duty of care and supervision of everything going on in the field.
Did you discuss it explicitly with either Detective Sergeant Webb or Detective Sergeant McIntosh?
No.
Can I ask you, please, about the end of your relationship with Miss Fuller? She is confident that when she started university, which was in the autumn of 1994, the two of you were still in a relationship. Do you recall still being in a relationship with her at that time?
Yes, possibly.
Before I move to the next report, I'm told we need to stop streaming to YouTube, please. Are you suggesting that she had met somebody else already when you had that conversation, or simply that it happened soon afterwards?
I think she told me she'd met someone else.
She's given evidence to this inquiry that a few weeks after that discussion between the two of you, you called her saying that you felt depressed and that you'd been drinking wine straight from the bottle because you felt distraught about the breakup. Did you call her either because genuinely you felt distraught about the breakup or giving her that impression?
Yeah, I do remember phoning her. I certainly didn't allude to drinking. I did say it was a shame, accepted it, but could we meet up?
And why did you do that? Was it because you genuinely had those feelings, or because you were furthering your cover as Matt Rayner?
No, I genuinely had those feelings. I missed her company.
Did you tell her that you were feeling depressed about it?
I told her that I was sorry we'd split up.
In doing this, did you give consideration to how Miss Fuller might feel being told that you were regretful about the breakup of the relationship, given that the whole thing was part and parcel of the deceit of your deployment?
No. I took the view that she was reasonably content with the new life she'd found with someone else, and appeared to be happy with it.
And that was before you met up or afterwards that you came to that conclusion?
Well, I think during and after the session, yeah.
When you made the call to her, telling her that it was a shame and that you wanted to meet up, what thought did you give at that stage about the impact on Miss Fuller of your actions?
Well, I thought it was important that she knew how I felt, how disappointed I was. We couldn't still be friends.
But why was that important, HM1, when you were always going to leave, because in reality you were simply an undercover officer?
Well, it was important, and that's how I felt, and that's why I did it.
So you agree that the two of you met. She recalls meeting in a small bar in the West End somewhere. Does that ring any bells with you?
Yeah, no idea where it was. It was certainly in a bar of some sort.
And her evidence is that when you met, you suggested making another go of the relationship.
Well, I don't remember saying that. It was clear that that was not on the cards in any case.
What was the purpose of meeting up to tell her that you thought it was a shame that the two of you had broken up, if it was not at least in part to see whether there was a chance at rekindling the relationship?
Don't know, hadn't really thought it through. I was keen at least maybe that we could go back to where we were prior to the relationship.
Yeah, so making another go of it?
Not necessarily, no, that was well and truly over. I knew that from the way she described how she'd moved on.
Her evidence is that it was at that meeting that she told you she'd met somebody else and that you didn't know before from her. Might that be right?
My recollection is that when I specifically asked her whether there was anyone else prior to that, she said there was. That's my recollection.
And she described your reaction to finding out that there was somebody else. Except you don't necessarily agree when that happened, but she described you as seeming frustrated. Is that an accurate description of your feelings?
Yeah.
And was that because you had hoped that you could keep the relationship going until the end of your undercover deployment?
No, I knew that was not on the cards. I mean, Liz made it quite clear that I was not exciting, quite boring, and it had run its course.
But before that, had you thought you might be able to keep the relationship going until the end of your deployment?
No.
Why not?
Well, I hadn't given it that degree of thought either way, but I didn't for a moment think it would last that length of time, but it wasn't a conscious stream of thinking.
In your witness statement, you described the relationship giving you a sense of security and validation. Were you concerned about losing that sense of security and validation when Miss Fuller broke off the relationship?
No, not at all, because I didn't seek to conceal my disappointment to others about how disappointed I was with that, so that was part of the process. Again, it all felt quite real for me.
In your real life as HN1, deployed undercover and conflicted about having entered into a relationship, was it not in your better interests and Miss Fuller's better interest perhaps to have the relationship appear to break off naturally rather than to try to carry it on, for example?
Well, in that sense, it did break off naturally with Liz making it clear the reasons for it, so that felt pretty definitive to me.
Ms. Fuller's evidence is that the conversation, the meeting that the two of you had, prompted by your request, left her feeling guilty. Did it cross your mind that if you expressed your disappointment at the ending of the relationship, you might leave her with feelings of guilt and responsibility towards you?
No, I didn't think it through in that way.
And are you quite sure that when you met her, you were not, at least in part, attempting to rekindle the relationship with her?
No, I mean, it was made so clear that even in my mind, had I been attempting that, there was absolutely no opportunity for doing that.
In your witness statement, paragraph 471, of the ending of the relationship or the aftermath, you say this: I remember being around the animal rights scene with Liz still there and dealing with the fallout from the end of the relationship. Other people were sorry it had ended. What did you mean by dealing with the fallout from the end of the relationship?
Well, my fallout was being upset by it.
And when you say other people were sorry it had ended, to whom are you referring?
I can't remember specifically. I remember Claire being very sympathetic.
Is that Claire Hildreth?
Yes.
And did you give Claire Hildreth the impression that you were sorry that the relationship had ended?
Yes, absolutely. I didn't seek to conceal it. It was all, that was absolutely how I was feeling.
Were you genuinely sorry that the relationship had ended?
Yes.
When you made your witness statement to this inquiry, you made no mention of calling Ms. Fuller after she had broken off the relationship and meeting up with her to discuss that it was a shame or that you were disappointed that the relationship had ended. Why did you not mention it?
Well, it was so definitively at an end that it was, there was this unambiguous closure as far as Liz was concerned, and in the way that any explanation for it, pretty, refreshingly brutal, I guess.
This meeting was a continuation, in a sense, wasn't it, of the ending of the relationship? Did you not think it significant enough to mention in your statement to the inquiry?
It was well and truly over by the time I had that meeting.
it was a continuation of your relationship in the sense of a friendship at the very least, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we were still going to come across each other at events.
Could I ask, please, that we look at some more reporting for which we need to turn off the YouTube stream again, please? Screen. This HM1 is a letter provided to the inquiry by Mr. Shepherd, Jeff Shepherd. He's got the envelope which indicates that he was written to whilst he was in Her Majesty's Prison, Parkhurst, as it was, on the Isle of Wight. Inglaterra is written there in the Spanish form, and the stamp indicates it coming from Argentina. That's one of the locations which you were, as Matt Rayner said, to have been going to as part of your withdrawal, isn't it?
Yes.
And we see Matt is written on it. And if we go over to see the body of the letter, please. On page 1, we see that Matt Rayner and then an address in Mendoza in Argentina is recorded at the top. 14th of February 1998. So this is over a year after you had left the field, isn't it?
Yes.
And I want to ask you specifically about page 4, please, of the letter, or page 4 of the internal document. And yeah, if we could, it's the top half, if we could zoom in on see the top half, because it's quite difficult to read. So I want to pick up right at the end of the first line, HM1. I often imagine what the good times that you, me, Privacy and Liz used to have. So I often imagine the good times that you, me, Privacy and Liz used to have. And I sometimes picture us all together out here walking in the hills. I've still got the postcard you sent me from the Lake District, because every time I read it, it makes me chuckle. You simply wrote on the back, "Dear Matt, it's bleak, see you soon." In fact, I can honestly say, Jeff, that I've never a day goes by without me thinking about both you and Liz. And although it's quite conceivable that you and I will meet up sometime, I don't think I can hope to see Liz again. She hasn't written to me once since I left England, and I wish I could shake off this daily feeling that I still miss her after all this time. Anyway, there is no need for you to bother her with my moaning. Just say hello to her, will you, the next time you're in contact. According to your evidence, Miss Fuller had broken off the relationship with you sometime, probably in the early part of 1995, so 3 years before this letter was sent to Jeff Shepherd in prison. Why were you saying to Mr. Shepherd, I don't think I can hope to see Liz again. She hasn't written to me once since I left England, and I can't shake off a feeling that I still miss her after all this time.
Is a question why I wrote that?
Yes, why did you write those things about Miss Fuller in this letter?
Well, this was a personal letter from me to Jeff, reflecting on the so-called happy times together, and giving a picture of missing her company, our collective company, and specifically her company. This was a letter to someone with whom I'd had a close friendship and was keen for them to know I hadn't forgotten them.
But your friendship with both of them was in the guise of Matthew Rayner, wasn't it? And by February of 1988, you were firmly back in the life of HM1, weren't you?
No, this was part of a longer-term exit strategy with a view to, as we spoke about earlier, the exit being something real.
So are you saying that this was a pretense when you wrote it, or that it was reflecting genuine feelings?
Well, to the degree that I'm allowed to say they were genuine, because that gets contested every time I say it. Yes, they were. It was a letter that was easy to write.
So even after more than 12 months out of the field, you were still writing these words with some level of genuineness. Is that your evidence?
Well, there's an element of that, but there's also an element of it being part of a sort of a heartfelt bearing of one's soul to someone with whom I'd had a long-term relationship, and to which the exit strategy was designed to reassure them, but even though I wasn't around, we would remain on good terms.
So a combination of maintaining your cover or ensuring that it was not breached after you withdrew from the field, and some genuine feeling. Is that what it amounts to?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, there was an element of, as with all the friendships throughout the whole of my time there was that combination.
Why did maintaining the fiction in regard to your relationship with Miss Fuller need to continue into 1998, when your relationship had broken off in the early part of 1995, so around 3 years before?
Well, if I was going to write to Jeff at all, it would be odd not to include something about Liz, with whom he knew I had a very close relationship. And I could have written in a different way, but it was, for me, a letter that was credible, convincing, and designed to cheer Jeff up.
Mr. Shepherd and Miss Fuller have given evidence that you never really went out together as a foursome with the individual whose name is redacted for privacy, and they consider that you were overplaying that aspect of things in this letter. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think in the reference to the four, I was talking about how I conjured up that scene, not that we did it.
But given that the four of you were not particularly close in that way at the time, was it not rather odd to be suggesting that you were imagining all hanging out together years afterwards?
Well, I think in any combination of the four of us, we were close.
So you were close to Mr. Shepherd was close to Miss Fuller, etc., etc. Is that what you're getting at with that answer?
Yes, and indeed with the other person.
Can I turn back now that we have explored in more detail the relationship that you had with Miss Fuller? Briefly, some of the topics that I asked you about at the outset on Wednesday, because when I was asking you, for example, about your various earlier accounts, you gave the impression that it would be clearer to answer once you'd had a chance to explain the relationship. One of the things you said, or you addressed on Wednesday, or I asked you about, was the apology on behalf of the Commissioner that had been advanced in this tranche of this inquiry. And your response included saying that some of the adjectives used in the apology you contested because you didn't think they applied to you, and you still don't. And you said you would have used a different set of words than the Commissioner used. I've been asked to clarify with you whether or not you and I were referring to the same apology. Do you follow? To make clear your evidence on that.
Okay, yes.
So I'm going to read to you the text from the opening speech of the Commissioner in this part of the inquiry, and then ask you whether you align yourself specifically with that. Do you follow?
Yes.
So I'm reading from paragraph 24 first, in which the Commissioner described the deceitful relationships of officers with women as, quote, a gross violation of the women's privacy and human rights, abusive, deceitful, manipulative, and wrong. The Metropolitan Police Service apologises again, unreservedly, to the women whose lives have been and continue to be affected. The Metropolitan Police Service also apologises to the wives, partners and families who have also been harmed by the misconduct of the undercover officers and the failure by the SDS's managers and senior special branch management to prevent that misconduct. And from paragraph 29, reviews have demonstrated that sexism and misogyny continue to be widespread and enduring features of the culture within the Metropolitan Police Service. The prevalence of sexual misconduct on the part of SDS officers in the Tranche 2 period, the general disregard for the personal autonomy and dignity of the women affected, together with the inaction or indifference of their managers in response, is a clear and acute manifestation of that culture, for which the Metropolitan Police Service unreservedly apologises. Do you align yourself with, first of all, the broad apology and the descriptions applied to the nature of the relationships in the first paragraph that I read out?
Well, I've already conceded that it was wrong to have done that.
Do you concede that it was a gross violation of Miss Fuller's privacy and human rights to enter into a deceitful relationship with her?
Well, I think if I did agree with that, it would have been all of those things as far as the intimacy of the friendship we had. I don't know what I think about this. I'm just, I mean, if that's how Liz feels, then that would have a bearing, I guess, on how I felt about it. But in terms of the dignity and the respect and the misogyny and the sort of the throwing of the kitchen sink at this, I do not align myself with any of those descriptors at all. And yes, it was the wrong thing to have done, and I deeply regret any of this resulting in the hurt that has been caused. But what happened, and within the confines of what happened, I was as respectful and as genuine and as real as I could have been, because that's how it felt. There was nothing in my view that was abusive, manipulative, planned, in the sense that some of this apology suggests was the case. I think we just have to look at my particular scenario, on the basis of how I've indicated I got there, what I then dealt with, and how it played out.
Do you consider that your situation is different from other undercover officers who had relationships with women in some way?
So I think every single one of them is different in terms of motivation, how it happened. Every single one of your questions, I think, will have elicited a different response. All I can tell you is, for me, it was deception aside, but it felt real. It took its course, and I was respectful of it as possible. And I think, from what I've heard, again, deception aside, I don't think it was any sort of contesting of the fact that I was fundamentally decent and compassionate and caring during it.
Whether or not you set out to or planned to enter the relationship, do you not agree that entering into it was abusive, manipulative, as well as wrong?
I don't believe it was manipulative, because I didn't intend to be, I didn't plan to be, I didn't consider what I was doing as being manipulative. I do contest it was wrong. Sorry, I don't contest, I beg your pardon. I agree that it was wrong. I've said that several times. I made a bad call. I should have not allowed my emotions and the intensity of what I was feeling to have got the better of me, but they did. Such was what I felt.
A few moments ago, when I was asking you if you aligned yourself with some of that wording, you said, if Liz feels that way. I'm going to quote to you from some of what Miss Fuller told the inquiry this week when she gave evidence about the impact on her. She said, "It's really, really hard to reconcile this man," which she meant Matt Rayner, "with this man," meaning you, the real HM1, "and it's just left me confused, bewildered. My self-esteem has taken a knock, and I'm really careful. I don't really trust anybody 100% anymore." Do you want to add anything else, reflecting on how she has described the impact upon her?
Well, it's very upsetting to hear, but I do come back to the fact that this was never intended, meant, or understood that this would ever be an outcome, this type of disclosure. It was, that's all I can say. In terms of reconciling the difference between that person, it was just, I say, before anyone else gets there, yes, it was deceitful because by definition I wasn't who I purported to be. If you take that out of it, on my part, the sentiment, the feeling, and the intensity of my feelings for Liz were absolutely genuine.
Do you align yourself with the apology that the Commissioner has made to the wives of undercover officers, specifically to your own wife at the time?
Well, we've dealt with that in our own way, and that apology is not required. Yeah, I'm talking about my specific case.
Yes. Do you accept personal responsibility for the relationship, for entering into and continuing the relationship?
Yes.
Have you to date apologised directly to Miss Fuller?
Well, I think I have done, haven't I? I regret what happened, and I regret that how this process and her coming to know of something which, in my opinion, didn't need to know about, has played out. All I can offer is that, as far as I was concerned, I was not hiding how I felt, or masquerading, or pretending.
Correct me if I'm wrong, HM1, but what you seem to be saying repeatedly is that the harm here is that it was disclosed, that it was found out, rather than your conduct for which you were responsible. Is that how you feel?
No, it's not how I felt. I know every time I say this, we can get back to that crude inference with respect. I mean, all I'm saying is this was done with a view to the outcome of this not being the hurt and the discovery and the finding out. It was the whole operation, the friendships included. I embarked on with a view to entry, building friendships, and extraction, and moving on with people being none the wiser, even if they suspected, as opposed to having the confirmation.
I want to return then finally on the topic of your relationship with Miss Fuller to the accounts that you gave prior to your inquiry witness statement, now that you've had the chance to answer questions about the relationship itself. I asked you, first of all, about an account you gave to officers from Operation Hearn in 2014. Do you remember me asking you about that?
Yes.
And you understood that that was a police investigation, didn't you, when they spoke to you?
Yes.
And you did not, did you, cooperate fully with that police investigation because you omitted to mention this relationship to them at all, didn't you?
Yeah, I wasn't asked about it. I was asked specifically about another person.
The omission of any mention of your relationship with Denise Fuller when asked about a relationship with another person was misleading, wasn't it?
It wasn't intended to be. It was the beginning of a process that I'd absolutely sort of no understanding of in terms of how it was linked to wider investigations. I was specifically asked, cautioned about, and questioned specifically with regards to one individual.
That was the interview under caution that you had?
Yes.
That was about one individual, yes?
Yes.
But you must have understood as a former police officer that if they were interviewing you under caution about the possibility that you had had a relationship with an activist in your undercover identity, then it was regarded as a serious matter. You understood that, didn't you?
Well, I understood what I was being asked about, and it was made quite clear that answer the questions, and so I answered the questions.
But if you're being interviewed under caution, you understand that the police are taking seriously an allegation or a suggestion that you might have had a relationship with an activist in your undercover identity.
All I can say is what happened on that day, and I answered all of their questions and the questions they put to me. These were experienced officers that got the answer to every question that they asked.
Well, you answered no comment in the interview, so they didn't get an answer to every question they asked, did they?
Well, that was a no comment in regards to that specific individual.
My question was not about what happened on that day. My question was about the understanding you would have taken away from being interviewed under caution by police officers about your conduct. You understood, didn't you, HM1, that the question of undercover officers having relationships with activists was a matter being taken seriously by the police through Operation Hearn. You understood that, didn't you?
Yes.
And yet when officers spoke to you, not just in the interview under caution, but also in 2014, you misled them by failing to mention anything about your relationship with Miss Fuller, didn't you?
I wasn't asked about it.
Why does it matter whether you were asked about it when it was clear to you that the Operation Hearn officers were interested in the subject of relationships between undercover officers and activists?
Well, this was the beginning of a process.
What does that matter? Why would you not be entirely candid and tell them to assist their investigation?
Well, I considered, I think they considered too, that all it was necessary to do was to answer questions, and I did.
You weren't only interviewed under caution, were you, HM1? You also spoke to the officers and gave a narrative account regarding your deployment. Why did you say nothing about your relationship with Miss Fuller to them?
Well, I wasn't aware that anything outside of what was going on the STS was part of that investigation at the time, and it was the beginning of a process which was dealing with generalities. I answered the questions that were put to me, and that's how I dealt with all of those the encounters with her.
When you saw them in 2014, the record of your interview with them records that you said, "I have participated to the best of my capacity," but you hadn't, had you?
I responded in my capacity in the context of the questions that were put to me, which was the advice given by these seasoned detectives, making it clear that beyond the questions, there was no need to go any further.
So are you suggesting that the Operation Hearn officers gave you the impression that you did not need to make any disclosure unless they asked you a direct question?
They were asking me direct questions throughout.
I'm not talking about the interview under caution, HM1. I'm talking about the debrief you had with them in 2014. Do you want to be reminded of the notes?
No, my recollection is I dealt with it to the best of my ability.
That's just simply not true, is it, HM1? The best of your ability as a former police officer yourself, a former public servant, answering questions to a police investigation would have been to tell them, yes, I too had a relationship with an activist undercover. It wasn't LTD. It was an activist named Denise Fuller or Liz Fuller. That would have been the honest and proper thing to do, wouldn't it, HM1?
Well, as I say, I answered the questions that were put to me. That's all I can say. That's what happened.
Hoping that nobody would ever find out?
Well, it wasn't my first choice that this became a public disclosure exercise.
All right. So actively attempting to avoid the police investigation ever finding out about what you had done?
Well, no, the police as an organisation knew because it was within the police organisation as fact.
So didn't need to tell them because if they looked carefully enough in the documents, they might find out for themselves?
Well, all I remember on that day was answering their questions. That's really all I can say on this one. I've nothing to add to that. Apologies.
Moving on then, again, just to give you the opportunity now that the details of the relationship have been the subject of questioning, the risk assessment process that you went through in making an application for anonymity before this inquiry. I'll put the document up briefly so that you can be reminded of what you said. MPS 0749632. 0749632, please, and scroll to section 2.17, please. I think it will be about page 4. Thank you. And this is 2.17 HM1, key associates, and then over the page, please, because we went through this in more detail on Wednesday. You mentioned Liz Fuller to the risk assessors. You said clever and interested in revenge. She would want him to feel the pain and some personal details, but you made no mention of the relationship at all, did you, to the risk assessor?
Well, the nature of the relationship was a very close association, from which that description and assessment was based.
Where does it say very close association?
Well, I didn't complete that. That's not my text.
Right, so you're saying you told them that you had a very close association with Miss Fuller?
I'd imagine so, yes.
Well, did you or did you not?
I don't recall a detailed conversation, but in terms of that being part of the assessment in terms of how she might feel as a close associate, but that looks accurate to me.
You understand full well, don't you, HM1, that for the purposes of this risk assessment, there was a material difference, a distinction being drawn between a close associate and you having had a sexual or intimate relationship with somebody in your undercover identity?
Well, yes, I think that would have enhanced that statement, not diminished it.
Sorry, enhanced what statement?
The nature of or the intensity of the need for revenge. I didn't describe that word. That's a summary.
But when this risk assessment was taking place, you understood that it was connected to this public inquiry, didn't you?
Yes.
That you were making an application before this inquiry to remain anonymous, yes? You understood that's what was happening?
Yes.
And you understood that one of the things this inquiry would be investigating was whether or not undercover officers had been having relationships with women in their undercover identities, yes?
That was a part of it, yes.
And you did not at any time disclose during the risk assessment process that you had had a sexual, intimate relationship with Miss Fuller, did you?
I don't believe so, no.
And do you agree that that was misleading? Your failure to mention amounted to deceit?
Not in terms of the risk assessment. The entirety of the risk assessment goes beyond my involvement in that world.
It does, but you were asked about your deployment, weren't you, as part of the risk assessment? That's why we see a list of key associates with whom you associated undercover.
Yeah, and I would have described and did describe the intense nature of my close relationship with those individuals.
Yes, but not that you had a sexual relationship with Miss Fuller.
Not specifically, but I mean, had I done so, that would have only sort of enhanced the severity of the likely animosity.
Yes, so all the more reason to mention it.
Well, as I say, that's part of, in isolation, that's not the whole risk assessment. There's much more to it.
What does that matter in terms of whether or not you mentioned a sexual relationship with Miss Fuller, HM1?
Well, I considered that a declaration of a very close friendship was sufficient.
You understood, didn't you, that if you'd had a sexual relationship with an activist in your undercover identity, that would have been a significant piece of information for this inquiry to discover?
So this inquiry has become aware of it, is aware of it, has been aware of it for a long time.
Were you hoping, when you underwent the risk assessment process, that the inquiry might never find out?
No, I was absolutely certain that the inquiry would, and I would have to talk about it.
Finally, can we return to the impact statement that you signed and was submitted on your behalf to this inquiry as part of the anonymity application? So it's your A4, it's UCPI 037228. And I want to ask you about a part that was not, we did not cover on Wednesday. Can we turn, please, to page 3 of the extract? And you said this in your impact statement, which was your first witness statement, in effect, to this inquiry. At the end of paragraph 16, I am worried that I would be tarnished by the actions of a limited number of officers, or the brackets so far untested allegations made by activists. When you made that statement, you had not forgotten that you yourself had a relationship, a sexual relationship, whilst undercover, had you?
Correct.
And yet you chose to refer there to the possibility of being tarnished by the actions of a limited number of officers, presumably other officers.
Yes.
The implication.
That was one aspect of it. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I beg your pardon. I interrupted you. I was just saying by some, yes.
The implication in that statement is that you should not be regarded as included amongst the officers against whom allegations had been or might be made, isn't it?
The allegations that were made by some were contained accusations that haven't been made about me in terms of conduct and behaviour. So I did, and I do distinguish my circumstances from those of others, and the degree to which, yes, sorry, that was my answer to that one.
You were, I suggest, HM1, willing to mislead the inquiry up and until you were asked a very direct question through your lawyers in 2000 and at the end of 2017. You were willing actively to mislead those who asked you about whether or not you had had a relationship with Miss Fuller, weren't you?
No, I do dispute that. I accept that there's a sort of clumsy chronology here. I really don't think I could have been, throughout the whole of this process, cooperative, collaborative, and open. I think I don't want any praise for it, but I'd like, some acknowledgement that that has been the case, and I'm aware that it's certainly not the case with many others.
fully collaborative and cooperative would have been to tell Operation Hearn when they first came asking in 2014 that you were one of the officers who had engaged in this behaviour, wouldn't it?
So there might have been a slicker way of doing it. Would have been to have got the whole story out quickly, but it was the beginning of the process that no one had any real clue which direction it would go in. So all I can say is that wasn't a slick part of the process, but on Operation Hearn, I did not lie to Operation Hearn, and the net contribution to date, I just I would suggest I've been open, collaborative, have given everything to an operation which is a truly testing, traumatic, difficult 5 years. So there's more to talk about as well, but I don't think anyone could actually genuinely come away with an assessment of me having attempted to deceive, mislead the process after sitting through not only this, but in the years that have gone into sort of the build up to this. That's my answer, or comment, sorry.
Failing to mention that you had had a relationship with Miss Fuller was not about whether or not your response was slick. It was about whether your response contained the whole truth, wasn't it?
So I accept I could have mentioned it earlier, but I did mention it. It has been known about for a long, long time, but I concede that I should have mentioned it earlier.
And to have mentioned it earlier would have been to be more truthful and not to have misled people by omitting essential information, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't think was any attempt to mislead. If there was any sort of material way in which people think I've done that, then please do remind me. There was no intent to do that. I accept that in response to what were pretty closed questions, I could have been more discursive, but net contribution and the speed at which and the level of openness, I think I've done okay on.
Do you think you abided by the spirit of police regulations in not mentioning to Operation Hearn something that was clearly of interest to the police investigation?
Well, all I can say about that is, sorry to repeat myself, I did answer their questions.
Do police regulations simply require you to answer the questions you're asked, or do they require you to be candid and fully truthful in the face of a police investigation?
Well, I think I have been candid and truthful over the duration of this very, very lengthy process.
So I can move to a new topic, or we can break now at that stage.
I think we may have reached a time at which, unless the new topic can be completed within 20 minutes at the most, we have reached the end of what we can do.
I don't think I can guarantee to complete it in 20 minutes.
In that event, I think we will pause now. HN1, it's hoped and expected that your evidence can be completed in 2 days. Let me get it right. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but in the...
So I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
I gather that there is no fixed date yet. So it may be better, rather than to set hairs running, to wait until that can be confirmed.
Well, I was going to mention what the date was on the assumption that arrangements can be made, but if you think it wiser, I won't.
I'm receiving instructions to suggest that it might be best to wait and see if the arrangements can be made first.
Your evidence is going to take, I'm told, at least sorry, I'm going to tell, will take 2 days to complete, and I would ask you to be available to give evidence in 2 consecutive days, or what I hope will be 2 consecutive days in the not too distant future. I know that you can't do it next week, and the inquiry is not going to interrupt your arrangements next week, but can I ask you, please, to be ready to resume in the fairly near future for 2 days?
Of course, sir, yes.
Yeah. Can I mention one further thing? I don't think you have had the opportunity to speak directly to Denise Fuller. If I were to give you that opportunity now, is it one that you would wish to take?
I don't think so. So I'd rather not take that opportunity just at the moment, if that's okay.
Is that because it is, as it were, public in front of a whole lot of people, because that problem can be cured, or because you would rather do it in different circumstances?
I'd like some time to reflect on it, if I may.
Yes.
Might I take this opportunity to raise the question of communication?
Yes.
Given he is now part hers. In the ordinary way, there will be no communication with him about the subject matter of his evidence. However, it is certainly possible that there will be matters arising between now and the next date, which HN1's assistance may be required on, such as this week, where we received a new witness statement, photographs and a document, and his views may indeed need to be sought. We would hope that there wouldn't be new material arising now, but in case there is, it seems sensible to ask for permission now rather than waiting.
Of course, I am well aware of the responsibilities under which counsel and solicitors representing someone at an inquiry are under. I have not the slightest doubt that they will be fulfilled, and of course, if you consider it necessary, you may do so. In the event of anything arising which causes a difficulty or doubt to you, please raise it directly with the inquiry.
Of course. Thank you, sir.
Very well. We will adjourn now and resume on Monday at 10.